Welcome back to Learn IT Courses Online. We're very glad that you're joining us with this session as we're moving forward with our ETL subject matter. Again, ETL is short for extraction, transformation, and loading. In simple terms, that we're taking data from a source, transforming it, and loading into a destination. So as we've seen in the earlier cases, our source could have been an Excel file or a CSV file or even tables within a database. Transformation, which happens in some cases, is where sometimes I'm not loading it one-to-one. I need to make some changes. I need to aggregate the data. I need to merge the data. I need to split the data. I need to do some kind of a transformation to it, and then I'm going to load it into my destination. So today, we have a more exciting and a more challenging scenario. Hope you guys enjoying it, and thank you for joining us. In today's scenario, we have something that happens a lot. We have a source, which is this folder, and files come in as CSV, comma-separated values, or comma delimited files. And we have a destination, which is our coolest restaurant. So every day at midnight, the manager, as I've explained in the past, the managers of each branch, again, the coolest restaurant, our database, our SQL Server database is in the headquarters in New York City. But we have, as a franchise, we have branches in Chicago and Houston. So the manager in Chicago, at the end of the shift, 11 p.m. or almost at midnight, creates an Excel sheet and places that information out there. So it has the branch, which is Chicago, the title, which is waitress, waiter, manager, the name of the employee, Sarah Jones and Ahmed and Sam and Maria, total hours that they've worked, 7 hours, 9 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, and then the survey, which is what they got graded for in that shift. That's the Chicago file. And then in the next file, we have the Houston manager. And they put that information. Now notice something. Notice that the file, even though today's January 1st of 2018, notice that we don't have a date on the file. So one thing that we want to do is, we want to pick up both files with the same SSIS package. I want to pick up both files and dump it into a table on a daily basis. But once I'm done, I want to be able to move this file into another folder called the archive data, the historical data. And since I'm moving it and it has the same file, when I have the file tomorrow, it's going to have the same name, probably overwrite it. I don't want that to happen. So once I'm done loading my data, I want to move it here and I want to attach the date at the end of the file name. So after the Chicago file name, I want to add the date so when I go to the historical file, I can always pull up that file from history. So we're loading data from the files that we have every single day to a table in the coolest restaurant database. And then we move those files, once we've moved them, into archive data, and then we rename them appending the date of that file. So I can go back a month later and find any of the last 30 days worth of files through the naming convention. So let's go ahead and start this. New project. Again, the naming convention, as we said, is very important. So integration services. And this is for the restaurant files, plural. We're going to click OK. Before we start, one thing that we're going to use, which is a little bit advanced, is we want to create a variable because we're picking the path or the files from a given folder. And I already know what that folder is. So let's go ahead and declare a variable. Notice that I have variables here. And we're going to go ahead and add a new variable. The variable name is going to be input source folder. And it's going to be a path, so that needs to be a string. The path of the file, we're going to click on it, and it's in our C ETL directory, so I'm just going to copy that and drop it off into the value. So whenever we refer to the input source folder, we're referring to the directory in which our Excel files reside or CSV files reside on a daily basis. Okay, at this point, what we'd like to do is read the files one by one. So what are we going to do? We're going to use what's called the for each loop container. I'm going to drag and drop. And start to configure it. What we're interested in is our collection. And then the next step is, of course, we're loading a file. So we're going to go into for each item and change that into for each file. And next we want to configure the expression. And for our directory, next, our variable, our input source file, drag and drop it into our expression, evaluate the expression. So that's our path, confirmed it, we click OK. We would like in each iteration to read the file name. And so what we'd like to do now is go into our variable mappings so we can declare a variable to handle that file reading. So for the file name, we're going to go with a new variable. So in each iteration, we're going to read our file name and save it into the variable. So let's give that variable, declare it as file name. We'll click OK. Again, so we're only interested in the file name and extension. So we're going to change this from fully qualified to name and extension. So what we have right now is a for each loop container that is going to read all the files that are in that folder one by one and loop through them. So the first part of it is kind of in progress and kind of ready for us. Now that we've created our control flow, our container, now we're dealing with the data. Now we want to get to the gist of it, what the data that's contained with our Excel files or CSV files. So what do? We go to our data flow, drag and drop it, and now let's double click so we can talk business. The good thing about it, since we already have the for each loop container, is that we only need to figure out or just pick one source and it's going to read the other sources. So it doesn't matter which one we pick. So we're going to go for our source assistant, drag and drop. We're going to say that it's a flat file, new flat file, browse, and I can pick any of the files that we have. So any of those files doesn't matter. Okay, looks like we're reading our data. Everything looks good. We have our source. Let's go ahead and grab our destination. SQL Server, new. Picked it. Let's get our direction, flow direction. Configure where we're moving it. Since we don't have a table yet in our database, we're going to create a new table. And let's give it a proper name. We'll call it all employees. Click OK. Mappings, and it looks like everything is going from our input to our destination. Click OK. Okay, let's just go back to the control flow. We're going to have a loop. We have two files, and we're going to read the same file twice. We'd like to make sure that we're reading the two files. So we want to loop for the first one and then the second one, not read the same file multiple times. So this is where we need to do one more configuration to this. So let's click on our flat file, which is our source. Highlight that. Look at the properties for that. and then expand into expressions. So expressions, we're looking at properties. So in our configuration, as we've seen with the expression builder, once we've clicked on validation, we've chosen to add in the input folder plus, and then the file name. So that way we pick up file after file from that input folder. And since we don't have value at this point, so what we're going to do is set the validation or delay validation to true. And also for our the control flow level, what we'd like to do is make sure that we set the validation on that one as well, or delay validation. Delay validation, true, which allows us not to worry about the validation happening at the beginning, but at the end of our process. So at this point, if we run it, we should be able to load our data from our flat file to our OLEDB destination from the two files that we do have on that given path to that single table. But let's make sure we're following naming convention, so we can write in, give it a proper name. Daily branch employee flat files, and that would be all employees table. Let's go ahead and start it out. And we have 8 rows that are loaded. Go to SQL Server. We didn't have a table earlier. So now we refresh. We have a table. And we select the data. We should have our records being loaded to us. Now that we've successfully loaded our files, we did mention that one thing that we need to do is move those files into our archive data folder. We don't want to hard code it in multiple places, and that's why, again, what we want to do is go to our control flow and declare a variable. So let's stop the execution, control flow. Instead of output, let's go to our variables. We want to add a new variable, and this time we'd like to call it archive data or archive folder. It's a path, alphanumeric, so we want it to be a string. And now we're going to put that path, so we don't have to worry about renaming that. So now we have a path called archive data that points to that folder where we're archiving our daily data to. Okay, this is going to get a little bit more interesting. Reason being that we're not just moving the data over to the archive data, but we're going to have a longer path because we're going to have the folder, the path that we have. We're also adding the file name, and then finally we're adding the date to the file name as we're archiving it. So what we're going to do is add one more, declare one more variable. We're going to call archive data. And let's just call it full path, for instance. It would be a string again. This time around, we're going to go to expressions. We're going to add in our archive data folder. Let's evaluate it to make sure we have the right path. And then we'd like to add the file name. Okay, let's make sure we got file name that we could use. So we'll use daily loaded file. So that's our path, that's our file name. Now as I'm looking through this and I'm validating it, I do see that I have the path and I have the new file name that's going to be archived, but I don't have the date yet. And I would like to add the date. So here's a sample function that I could use, or an expression that I could use that would give me today's date in a format that I think is reasonable. So I need to put plus and then how to get the get date so I can get today's date formatted and added in there. So for time's sake, we're just going to go in with a plus and the entire expression. So this is what we added to get the date part, or the date information. Just to make sure it works, we're going to click evaluate, and if it works, then I should be able to have the date information here, evaluate expression. And sure enough, this is what the file name is going to be. If I want to add something else, such as a .csv or a .text or whatever format it needs to be, that's where I'll add it. But for now, this is all I want, is the file name and the date in the archived or historical file folder. And that looks good enough for us. And again, since the file comes from a location, so we are going to add one more variable, one final variable, which is referred to as the input full path. And what we'd like to do is, that's going to be a string. Right. File name. Wait. Notice that when we're moving data from a source to a destination or transformation, it's within the data flow. But in this case, we're doing something on the operating system level. We're moving a file from A to B, but it's on the system level. So what we need is to go to our file system tasks. And let's configure that. As we've seen, we're moving the file, but we're also renaming it. So our operation becomes, or we'll switch that into rename file. It's asking us if we have a path variable. Absolutely, we do have our path variables here. So it's true. And then for the source variable, we're going to look for our input full path, which will give the file name and the full structure along with it. Is destination path variable? Yes, it is. The destination variable is going to be our archive data full path. Next, it's prompting if I want to overwrite the file in the destination. By default, every day when I run the file, I'm adding the date. So if it's January 1st, it's going to be 1-1. If it's January 2nd, it's going to be 1-2. So we shouldn't be overwriting files. However, in some cases, if the ETL fails somewhere in the middle, and I want to make sure that I rerun it again, so in a case like this, I would like to overwrite the destination of the file. So for now, we're going to set that to yes. So notice now we currently have the two files. In the archive data, we don't have anything. And if this runs successfully, then we should load the files. Not only that, but the file system should move the files over. We've already played with the first part. We're more interested on the second part. So let's go ahead and kick it off and see what happens. So notice Now that it ran successfully, we don't have any files in the source folder, but when we go to the archive data, it created those files and appended the day at the end. And again, we can change the format so that .csv is the end, but this is kind of a sample of how A, we've loaded the data successfully, and then B, how we've been able to move those files and archive them in the daily basis. Thank you very much for your time, and we hope to see you again in the next session. Thank you.